Welcome to our Hatchery Live. This is Jose Leal, and I'm here with my partner, Matt Perez. And today's guest is Scott Phillips from Vaunted Ventures. Welcome, Scott.
G'day. How you going?
Good day. I love that. Well, where are you at?
Well, I'm Australian, so g'day is a traditional welcome.
I know. So that's my reason for asking. So, Scott, we're going to sort of explore some ideas today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself first? Just who you are, where you're at, and what brings you here?
Oh, certainly. So my background is in law. So I'm trained as a lawyer, but I built my career as a technologist. So I have been very interested in visual and spatial computing. I'm kind of an old cyberpunk from way back, a bit of a Gibsonite. For those in the know, William Gibson, fantastic science fiction author, and I really enjoyed his work, certainly when I was younger. And I've built a career in visual and spatial computing, mostly like sort of CAD modeling and virtual reality and 3D printing, that sort of thing. In more recent years, I've become very interested in decentralized finance, Bitcoin, blockchain, but now also into another way of looking at the world of Web3, and starting to also bring the law back into that as well.
Interesting. Little intersection for us because we didn't get a chance to talk about this, but my background was in early CAD, computer-aided drafting in the architectural space, 3D modeling and all that. So
it's a fascinating.
I can tell we think alike.
Yeah. And the really interesting difference between vector modeling and parametric modeling was something I really like to emphasize. Parametric is super powerful, super powerful stuff.
Interesting. So you said that you're now moving into the sort of the legal thinking around Web3 and everything else that you're doing. Tell us a little bit more about that intersection between the stuff in Web3 and legal. Where do those things start to cross for you?
Well, I define Web3 fairly specifically. Well, specifically and generally, if I can get away with that, as the financialization of the internet at the protocol level, right? So that's kind of what Bitcoin started, and it's what Ethereum and all the other blockchains are really trying to do, is to fix the internet and bring it money, right? Bring it rights management, and bring in these legal concepts, and ultimately bring in the common law, right? Because that's really kind of wholly missing. The internet wasn't born fully formed. It was quite a skeleton initially, with some relatively simple protocols, and didn't come with a protocol for secure digital identity, for example. And so then we've seen various projects, some from Google and Facebook, and some from open source projects, to build some sort of identity framework so that you don't have to log in with a username and password into every single website that you ever visit, right? So, but that's still a little bit piecemeal, and there are still questions around the security of that, especially when we start to talk about what's coming down the pike in terms of quantum computing, and sort of, usually in this story somehow I get onto the topic of quantum computing, because that is a massive sleeper issue that people aren't very understanding of, and it's going to make Y2K look like a kindergarten picnic, quite honestly. It's really, I call it the quantum apocalypse, because it's going to basically rise up sometime within the next decade, almost certainly, and it's going to turn our security frameworks into digital confetti, right? Because basically, once you can calculate the private key given a public key, and that's it's a big but relatively straightforward mathematical problem, then all computer security pretty much in existence at the moment just goes away. And we're talking no secure messaging, banking systems, blockchains, digital signatures, all this stuff. Boom! It just doesn't work anymore.
Well, I would certainly agree with you on that, if that comes about as you project. But maybe we leave that for another conversation. I'd like to really focus on what you said about common law, because I think that as a topic sounds like what we want to hit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the power of common law, tell us about that as it relates. So you've brought us.
I'll just flag that quantum piece because it's highly relevant to this, because when you bring those common law concepts into the digital world, you just want to make sure they're not going to get steamrolled by what's coming down the pike, right?
Absolutely.
So that's kind of foundational, and it's foundational for all that stuff that I just spoke about. It all has to move across to some sort of quantum resistant system, because otherwise it's just not going to survive the next 10 years. So
can you give us an example of this quantum? I'm sorry, common law. An example of a common law concept and.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, one of the things would be digital signatures, right?
Okay.
So a digital signature today, DocuSign, Adobe Sign, HelloSign, and the long tail of other businesses that deal in digital signatures, they all use a certification authority digital certificate behind the scenes. That's what that is, really. That digital certificate is PKI, public key infrastructure. There's a public-private key pair at the heart of it, and your details if it's your certificate, right? As a sort of a band-aid measure for not having a digital identity protocol on the internet. So that has a exposed public key. I mean, public keys are called public keys because generally they are exposed, right? But it's a problem when you're talking about the quantum computing, right? Because if those can get broken, if those keys can get discovered through the public exposure of the public key, then they're not going to survive.
How is that an example of common law?
So because a digital signature, like a signature on a contract, is a fundamental element of common law contracts, right? And a seal on a deed is the execution aspect of a common law deed, right? So and there's a adage, I don't even know how exactly true it is, but there's an adage that all law is contract. I mean, there's also specialties of deeds, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so if you think about even legislation, right? Legislation is kind of a contract because there's the Constitution is sort of a contract, and all the mechanisms of Parliament is all made of laws. And if you think about it long enough, you discover that it's sort of all contracts. It's just people agreeing. That's what law is.
And force being the common ground of all of those. You're right.
Yeah. So did you say force just then?
He did.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. And so we agree that in certain circumstances, the force of the state can and should be applied to certain circumstances. When people are really breaking the law, then you need to stop them from doing that. And that kicks in. There's a political philosopher, John Rawls, and he talks about the overlapping consensus, and that's really the foundation of that. That's an agreement to use state force in certain circumstances.
So in this case, the example of common law is the overriding consensus, or whatever you call it?
Well, the common law, it sort of reflects that overlapping consensus. And that's how it's become manifest in our institutions, in our societies. So it's kind of the codification of that collective ethic, our collective values. And we say, well, because we believe all these things, then we'll write these laws to just make sure that we all agree and it's written down, and we're using our language, our written language and spoken language to express the way that we feel about all these things. You know, probably going back to the Ten Commandments in the Abrahamic traditions, right? Yeah, that's sort of how I see it, you know, from a pretty philosophical point of view.
Right.
Becoming manifest. We've got that in legislation, and it's reflected into the case law. And what I'm talking about is, how do we then bring all of that framework, that technology that's been developed over centuries and millennia, how do we bring that into the internet, into the digital environment? And not just as a PDF, but as a protocol, as something that can be programmed if necessary, but something that can be seen and understood. And that's really where the idea of cryptographic forensics comes in. And
Let me ask you, because I'm trying to understand. I'm still a little bit confused. So I got the thing about bringing law into the internet protocols. I got that. But what does that have to do with common law? I mean, the legislation is going to establish certain laws. It's going to enforce them, and the protocols are going to have to follow those laws, et cetera, et cetera. Is that what you're talking about, or?
Yeah, I think I see what you're getting at here, Matt. And so the common law is, I'd like to just propose that it's somewhat separate to legislated law. I mean, common law is really the way that that legislation has been interpreted by the courts in the main.
Okay.
But it's sort of its own thing in itself as well, because you've got, certainly in Australia, we have a fused jurisdiction, right? So common law courts from the UK and the Court of Equity have been fused, so you can get an equitable remedy in a common law court effectively. But this is sort of its own body of law, somewhat separate to legislation. I mean, often that gets codified in legislation, so it's not a dichotomy. It's quite a continuum. But
Scott, I was just going to jump in there for a sec. Some of our colleagues here in the States, legal colleagues, refer to it as private law. Individual contracts between individuals or groups that aren't tied necessarily to the state law, obviously bound by, but not directly dealing with. And so our ability to some degree, isolate what we're doing from the normal rigors of state law.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, a concept that I've found very potent is the concept of a unilateral contract. And I think this is quite an underutilized area of law, because like a unilateral contract is basically a contract that you offer not just to one other party, but to the whole world. Right? So you could do things like treaties, for example, this way. You could have a business that just says, and many businesses do. I mean, this is not that rare, really, but to make an offer to the whole world. You pay this money, you get this result, whether it's a product, service, or what it is. And so, yeah, I think that's really super powerful. And really what the framework that my company is bringing to market is about being able to do this in the digital world. We have a new data type called a vaulted object, and that enables digital content to be encapsulated in an encrypted data structure, and then common law deeds, sealed, executed common law deeds and contracts to be applied to that. So you can do things like attesting to its truth, and there's really a bunch of things that you can do when you put these simple building blocks together. Elemental, I'd say. So then it's up to anybody to decide what they want to do with those concepts, and how that they will allow then those concepts of common law to then be applied to things in the digital space and externally, because if you've got a digital deed can still affect your rights in regards to physical objects. There's
right.
no problem there.
Well, so here's a real world example that here within Radical we are dealing with. The way that we envision Radical companies is organizations that are co-owned and managed, right? And part of that process is negotiating the right to own for all members of the organization, and the right to share in profits, and the right to collectively manage the organization without having someone dictate what can and cannot be done, right? And all of those are currently being done in informal agreements that we call collaborative agreements, which are a takeoff from the conscious contracts. I don't know if you're familiar with that domain. The conscious contract.
Bit, yeah.
Okay. Our colleague Kim Wright and Linda Alvarez created that concept, and it works for us in the sense that what we're doing is the contract is more, or the agreement is more about the process of discussion and engagement and discovery of one another's purpose and intention and so forth, and then codifying that after that effort has been done. So the human effort first and codifying it second. Is that something that could then become digital in the way that you've described? Is that a use case possibly?
Well, absolutely. And I suppose one of the things that becomes interesting about a forensic provenance system that can contain media is that, I mean, you could negotiate it all over a Zoom conference and then vault the actual recording of the video conference. So you could then kind of attest to the conversation, and that entire conversation could be effectively part of the legal instrument at that point. So then, if anyone's really got a beef with what's going on, then we can all pull out the certified and provenanced version of the conversation that we had 5 years ago, and say, well, do you have a problem with what was discussed 5 years ago? Because we think this is in alignment with that, and we think it was all agreed to 5 years ago.
That's really cool, and one of the things that we recognize is that it really isn't about the fact that it was set in stone 5 years ago, but that it was started 5 years ago, and we've hopefully been adjusting and adapting and reconfiguring it throughout time as reality has set in, new contexts have emerged. Is that something that you think what you're describing would allow for, the constant updating and aggregation of multiple pieces of legal content, if you will?
Well, yeah, because like, I mean, it ultimately comes down to the intention of the parties, and you know, like once you've had those conversations, and this is really the stuff of law. This is what good lawyers do, right? They have conversations and stimulate conversations around all the different things that ends up being clauses in contracts, right? And they surface all of these issues. Right? So if you end up into a situation where some of these issues haven't been considered, because you know, who even knew 5 years ago, then of course you can you know, add those in later on. You don't have to; it doesn't have to come out fully formed, and rarely does. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could do the same thing, and just in a technical manner, you could create another vaulted object, or probably extend to an existing one.
So if we trusted ourselves as members of the same organization, and we've written this up and we put it on our Google Docs, and Google Docs has a sense of what got edited and what didn't get edited, and we have a Google Docs document that we trust for the most part. What would the difference be? What would the difference between that agreement that has edit histories and things of that nature, and maybe we could add a video to that and include it, and you know, we know when it was added and by whom and so forth. How would that be different?
Well, it's different in, well, certainly the technical architecture, but that's sort of trivial. It's really different in the sense of the strength of the provenance, because that document, once it's been agreed to, then it can be attested to by all the different parties through our framework, and that provides a cryptographic binding to the digital identity of each of the people applying seals to that. And so nobody then has to trust that no Google engineer has got in and fiddled with it and changed something important, because that's just not possible.
Right. So the aspect of the technicalities of being able to make sure that it's 100% locked down is really what you're bringing to the table. And I appreciate that. I think there's value in that, and I think that's what crypto brings us is the ability to do that in many ways. But I wonder if the idea of agreements between individuals as a mainstay of how we create organizations, for example, rather than an organization having a voice and dictating who gets to be in the organization and how that organization is structured and all of that, where rather than building a corporate entity that has as many or more rights than the individuals that are working within it, the idea that we don't create a third party, but we create a collaborative amongst ourselves, and do so with common law between ourselves, not going into corporate law and other legal structures that go beyond who we are.
Yeah, so you've sort of got a continuum between companies, and then into associations, and then into bilateral and multilateral agreements between people. And this framework will support all of that. So it's then really up to individuals as to how they want to deal with their own governance, right? Governance of whatever the project is, whatever the common endeavor is. So yeah, I mean, you can do that now with pieces of paper as well.
Right.
So it's all very possible. And yeah, so the infrastructure that we're bringing to market, it has some certain other functions that are quite actually unique to the digital world. So as we bring this whole common law framework in there, there's things that we can do once we get into the digital space that are quite interesting. So and one of those is what I call fractional seals. So let's just talk about this in the sense of a corporation, because it sort of makes most sense there. But it could apply to any level along that continuum, which is that, let's say the board of a company makes a resolution about something specific that needs to be authorized. Then they can create, rather than having just their company seal applied to that, they can create a fractional seal that can be used by anyone in the organization to authorize for that specific purpose according to that minuted board resolution, right? And so they have this little digital thing that they can then put on a contract to do that, whatever it is. And then the receiver can look at that and go, oh, right, okay, the board did authorize this because here's the seal specifically for it. That doesn't exist in any other form, so far as I know, but it's a functional part of our framework.
And so fractional in what way? Because it's only being used for the instance of the board rather than the whole of the organization? Or fractional that is being used for that document?
Because it's for that specific resolution of the board.
For the specific resolution, right.
So it's the board has delegated power kind of down into that seal. And then an officer of the company can take that seal and go, bang, see here, it's been authorized.
What about a slightly different, well, not slightly different, and a completely different thought, which is that I, as an individual, with the same powers and rights as everyone else in an organization, rather than being a CEO or a chairman of the board or whatever it may be, can that apply in the fact that a bunch of individuals who don't have any more rights than one another are able to bring about a collective signing of something? Say, for example, we generate an agreement and 3/4 of the members decide that they want to be part of that agreement to purchase something or to do something, but not every member wants to do that. So those individuals that sign on to that are the ones that are in there. Is there a mechanism for that to help, or subsets of the larger group work in that way?
You could absolutely build that. We've not thought through that in the specific sense that you described, but I think that's entirely possible, and I think that fractional seals aspect kind of speaks to that as well, because you can then have rather than a formally constituted board, you can have a majority requirement. So 2/3 majority, let's say, to then create that specific fractional seal, and then anyone in the organization can then utilize that and authorize the spending of money or the application of
right. In this case, it wouldn't be so much a voting scenario as you've described, but more of what Matt likes to call a banner, which is a group of individuals who are doing something outside of the normal operational day-to-day, and identifying a special case, a special investment, a special project, something unique that only a part of the organization wishes to be involved in and condones, and being able to lay both claim and responsibility for those individuals rather than the whole of the organization. So really becoming sort of fractional in nature about not having to force everyone to do certain things if they don't think it's the right thing to do. If half the organization wants to do an experiment, then half of the organization goes away and does that experiment, and the other half might want to do a different experiment. And so those agreements and the protocols within them and how they're going to do them is would be assigned within these agreements, and then an understanding of who's behind it and who's funding it and so forth would be built into that.
This is exactly the concept of a DAO, right? And so 2016, I was a token holder in the original Ethereum DAO, the perhaps somewhat arrogantly named the DAO, which spectacularly blew up when it got hacked, and $62 million drained out of it, which was very unfortunate. But when that was a thing, how that was structured was that it was actually a fractal DAO, I suppose you'd call it, because that was set up such that the mothership contract, the mother DAO, could create child DAOs. This thing was more or less a crowdfunding system on an Ethereum smart contract, and so when people collectively, proposed projects, and it was agreed on that they would get funded, then it would produce a replica of itself, and it created a child DAO, and that child DAO would then get funded from the mothership, and it could go off and do its own little project. So that's kind of the structure that I think you're pointing towards, which is that you could have this sort of structure where it's almost like creating subsidiaries, right?
Right.
So you create a subsidiary venture, the people that are interested jump into that for a while and, make it work. And people that don't care about it, they don't have to. But there's some degree of common ownership, and, you could mix it up any way you like in terms of the people that contribute. Maybe they're picking up, shares in the subsidiary venture directly, and then the mothership venture owns a bunch of the equity as well. So everybody's still a common purpose, common organization.
Right.
Then there's just a bit of wiggle room for people that get really into a particular topic.
Well, we're about 5 minutes from the hour, and this has gone for quite a bit, so it must be interesting. And but I'd like to announce that next week our guest is going to be Tina Biver. No relation to the singer, I don't think. And there she is. And she's a partner at Adaptive.org. And we've known Tina for a long time. And it's Tina with an E at the end, not Tina with name. And we know her for a long time, but she's going to a new venture now, and I want to see what that's about. So with that, I'd like to make your closing remarks. And
thank you, Scott, for joining us today and for telling us about your thoughts on common law and the work that you're doing with Vaulted Ventures. Anything you want to just sort of wrap up with your thoughts on what it is that common law is going to do for us in the future, and the opportunities that there are in connecting those two Web3 and common law concepts?
Yeah, thanks, Jose. I think that the whole space of Web3 has been absolutely captivating for me personally for many years, and for a lot of people. And yes, the opportunities in it are just vast. I can see how common law legal rights and contracts and money and all that stuff can really be applied at the protocol level, at the sort of level of APIs, and can be can be programmed into our networks and into applications, and be done in an efficient way that is still actually quite human. Because what we've got at the moment is kind of the Internet of Things, right? We have IP addresses, Internet Protocol addresses. They are addresses for things. That's our devices. It's our phone, it's our laptop. And the framework that we're talking about is a layer on top of that, if you like, which is really the Internet of People. And bringing in these common law rights, that's people's rights, right? It's not devices' rights. So that's what this is really about, is to bring a layer in here that works for people. I mean, it sounds a bit scary and technical at times, but really what this is about at the level that matters is organizing our digital world so that it works for human beings. And I think that's probably a good point to wrap up on, because that's really the essence of all of this.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Jose. And we've got another show.
Perfect. Thank
Terrific.
you, Scott. Have a good eye, as you would say.
Yeah. All right. Enjoy. Ciao.
Cheers.